Hi guys, it's Allie, and since this past Wednesday was my birthday, I thought today we might get a little bit sentimental. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention that I made this video purely out of fun and sentimental value. It is definitely not meant to be a tag or a challenge in any sense of the word, but if any of you guys that are members of the Bookturnet would like to make a video using this idea of the books that have kind of shaped you into the person you are today, I think that would be really cool, so just let me know if you do that, and then I will watch those videos. Anyway, back to the video. As I mentioned in the intro, this past Wednesday was my birthday, and so I wanted to do something fun and different to celebrate the occasion, and I came up with this idea of just going through all of the books through my life from childhood to now that have had a significant impact on me as a reader, as a writer, as a person, beyond just liking a book. There are certain books that shape you as a person, and you can tell a lot about a person from what books they like, so I figured I would lay my soul bare for you today and tell you all of the books that have impacted me, at least that I can remember off the top of my head. When I was a little kid, I liked books well enough, as far as I can remember. I wouldn't call myself an obsessive or avid reader at the time, but you know, I read Cat in the Hat and all of that kind of stuff. But one of the books that really stood out to me as a kid was Hamlet. Specifically, this version of Hamlet from the Young Reader's Shakespeare, which is basically just taking Shakespearean plays and watering/toning them down for a childhood audience so that they can have a head start on Shakespeare when they actually have to start reading it for academic school, which is a really cool idea. I don't know why my parents chose Hamlet out of all of the possible Shakespearean plays they could have chosen, but to this day, Hamlet is my favorite Shakespearean play, so I guess it's gotta count for something. Because I read this when I was so little, I can't say that I know for sure that it had a huge impact on my life, but I do think that it did its job of preparing me for Shakespeare when I actually got around to reading it in like middle school and high school, and I vividly remember reading this book multiple times when I was a kid, which is more than I can say for other facets of my life as a youngin'. So, going in the list. The second and final book from my childhood days that is included on this list is one that I've actually mentioned before. I think it was in my Christmas haul video. Basically, in 5th grade, we had our reading and writing classes separated. So we had different teachers for writing and reading. And at the end of the day, when I was in reading class, we would usually go through a book and read a couple chapters out loud, or have our teacher read a couple chapters out loud. In this case, it was the latter option, and our teacher read this whole book aloud to us. And I just was so obsessed with it. And that was this book, The K by Theodore Taylor. I got this book for Christmas. It is like a signed first edition copy from 1969, I think is when this book came out. Specifically, it's like a survival story, and I just remember being so into it. I was so obsessively into this story, and I have not read it since 5th grade, so I'm actually planning on trying to reread it again and maybe like vlogging my experience and seeing if I feel differently about it now, because there are elements to this that I believe could be a little iffy, but I won't know until I reread it again, so that might be coming soon. But one way or another, whatever the actual content of these books that I'm mentioning, they are books that impacted me in some way, and this one definitely made me want to read more books and have more books read to me, I guess you could say. I was one of the only kids in the class that was actually interested in hearing what happened next in a story, and that's followed me through the rest of my life to today. So this one is definitely deserving of the list. Oh, middle school. In middle school, I, like everyone else, wanted to be considered cool, and reading and being bookish was not considered cool, so I didn't really do much of it. But one day, I was sitting next to a friend in class who I considered very cool, and she told me about a little movie that had just come out called Twilight, and then she told me that it was based on a book series that she had also read, and she suggested that I read the books. I was pretty much like, okay, cool story, I'll probably watch the movie, but I'm not going to read the books, and that was going to be that, until my dad informed me of the fact that he had bought the first 2 books for me on his way home from work one day. And so at that point I kind of had to read the books because someone had asked me to. My dad had actually actively bought me the first 2 books, so I wasn't even going to get out scot-free by just reading the first one and being done. So I went ahead and read them, and that is this exact copy that I hold in front of me that he got. But I was a teenager. I was in 7th grade, I think, when I first read these books, and I was swept up in all of the craze that happened around them. But it was more than that, honestly. I think a lot of times we can give a lot of crap to Twilight because it is a pretty tropey, YA, supernatural, fantasy, romance situation, and all of that stuff is very true. But around that time, I really just had stopped reading entirely. I thought books were kind of stupid. I only really interacted with books that were assigned to me in class, and a lot of times those were not good books. Reading this and having somebody suggest it to me and having it be considered cool and accepted was huge for me as a middle schooler, because it gave me permission to geek out. It gave me permission to like something as much as I liked these books. And not only that, it turned me into a huge avid reader. It turned me into the obsessive reader that I was not even when I was a little kid. And so that also counts for something. I wouldn't be sitting here today if not for Twilight. And not only that, but after reading the whole Twilight series was the first time that I picked up a notebook and tried my hand at writing my own story. So I wouldn't even be a writer if not for Twilight. So there's a lot of things that are tied up in this book for me. It is a huge plot point in my life of me reading Twilight, and that is just something that I think a lot of us share and a lot of us kind of push under the rug because it's become kind of this meme to hate Twilight. And I haven't reread Twilight since I was in high school, so I don't actually know how I would feel about it now as an adult reading it, but it's not meant for me as an adult. It was meant for me as a 7th grader in my, middle school days when I needed this kind of book most. I was getting really deep for being Twilight. After Twilight, I was like an addict without a fix. I knew that I wanted to read and I knew that I was becoming an avid and an active reader, but I really had no idea how to gain access to the kind of books that I wanted to read. Our school library was super tiny. I had never actually been to the public library before, at least not to actually peruse the shelves myself, and the only way that I knew how to receive recommendations was through friends, and a lot of my friends weren't very into reading. So at the time, I actually completely depended on my dad going to the library after his workday and picking up just a book that he thought I would like, and he'd bring it back. And I read so many amazing books that way. That's how I found the His Dark Materials series, and that's one of my favorite book series of all time. The only reason why it's not on this list is because I can't remember if it actually impacted me as a reader or a writer in any way, other than the fact that I watched the Golden Compass movie way more times than anybody should watch a single film. But at a certain point, I was reading too quickly for my dad to keep up. As soon as I finished a book, I wanted to read something else, and depending on the way that the library worked, I was sometimes waiting like a week before I could get a new book. And so eventually I gave in and went over to my older brother's room and asked if I could look at his bookshelves and see if I could find anything there worth reading. And one of the things on that shelf was this book. Well, not this book, this is my copy, but I went in and found the whole Harry Potter series because all of the books are already out by this point. This was like 8th grade, maybe early 9th grade. I had not read the Harry Potter books yet, and I could technically say that I read it when I was a kid because my older brother had read the first book out loud to me, but I was not really paying attention, and so I can't really count that. But at this point, I was just so starved for content that I was like, sure, I guess I'll give that a try, as if Harry Potter was just this like tiny blip on my radar of books. So I really experienced the story for the first time through borrowing his book from him. And obviously some of the movies were already out, all of the books were already out, so I knew a good deal about Harry Potter. My brother really loved the books, and so it was really just a matter of time before I read them myself. But I still wonder why it took me so long, because there is something that's just truly magical about Harry Potter, and I don't know how to replicate it. I don't know how anybody could replicate it, and I do think a good portion of the hype is because the world feels so accessible and we feel like we can be a part of it. And just because, the story might have flaws and the characters might have flaws, the world at the end of the day is something that we all wish we could be a part of, and that's what makes the story so successful in a lot of ways. But I was completely taken over by this book. It was the first kind of really magical story that I had read, other than like the His Dark Materials, that has a little bit of a darker tone. And so this one was just like pure fun, and I just remember absolutely adoring these books. I read through all of them in like the course of a week, and I have never been the same. I mean, I worked at Harry Potter World for 2 years of my life, so I mean, Harry Potter has definitely become a part of who I am as a person, and also who I am as a writer and as a reader, because this is like the quintessential fantasy book, isn't it? Despite any flaws that it may have, Harry Potter and the whole kit and caboodle of the Wizarding world is truly a phenomenon, and I was an idiot for not reading it sooner. High school was a period of great personal growth for me. I no longer cared if I was considered cool, and so I loaded up on AP classes and electives like graphic novels and creative writing, and just really let my geek flag fly. Because of that though, ironically, I had very little time to actually read for pleasure outside of the school context. Just like it had been when I was a kid, a lot of the books that I was reading in high school, especially later high school years, was coming through the channels of required reading that my English teachers gave me. I've made a video talking about required reading in the past, but basically when I was in high school, I vowed to myself that I would give all of those required reading books a chance because I had learned that I really liked to read and wanted to prove to myself that I could also read books that I might not initially pick for myself, because even Twilight I hadn't picked for myself. I wanted to give every required book a chance before I just wrote it off the way that a lot of schoolmates do when they're just trying to prove to one another that they're too cool for school. So I decided to give all of those books a chance, and boy was that a good idea, because not only did my teachers pick good books most of the time to have us read, but by giving them a shot, I actually found a lot of books that I truly love, and I could have put a lot of them on this list. All's Quiet on the Western Front, A Separate Peace, Crime and Punishment. There are a bunch of books that I read that I absolutely adored and would not have given them a shot if not for the fact that they were required for me to read through school. But the book that I have chosen to kind of represent all of those required reading books that I ended up loving is specifically Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer, specifically because it is one of those books that I ended up loving even though it was required, but also it is a nonfiction, it's a travel essay style book, and I had never really read books like that in the past, but have since learned that I really do enjoy reading nonfiction that's told in this kind of travel essay format. And it was also a summer reading book, which are infinitely worse than books that you're just required to read during the year. And so the fact that I was still able to enjoy it and to take something out of it is a testament to how good the book is. So there you go for that one. This last book that I am including, I stretch to call it a book, but I wanted to include it anyway because it is a bound thing of paper and it did impact my life in one way or another, and that is this, which is my first literary magazine that I ever was a part of in high school, and also the first time that I was ever published in anything ever. I had a short story in here called The Cough that I wrote in high school. I still really like this idea, but it was just really cool to see my actual writing on a page and to have it in a book format that somebody else made, not just me stapling together sheets of printer paper, but actually something that I could like hold in my hand. So this was the first time that ever happened. I was in other literary magazines after that, but this was the first and therefore the closest to my heart. On to college. Like high school, I didn't really have a lot of time to read for fun in college, but I did read a lot more required books that I ended up really enjoying. But I definitely made time for this book, and you guys have heard me talk about this book a bunch, but I'm going to talk about it more now because it's my video and I can do what I want to. Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. I honestly didn't expect much from this book. I didn't know if I was going to like it. I had not read any other books by Laini Taylor before reading this one, and so I had no idea how her writing style was like. I had no idea about the world building. I had no idea about anything, but this has quickly become one of my favorite books of all time, my favorite book series of all time for sure, and it's just absolutely phenomenal. It has the same level of magic for me as a young adult as it did for me reading Harry Potter for the first time. The magic systems are not at all the same, the books don't even have the same tone, but just in terms of feeling the magic and feeling the world that is being created in front of your eyes, that's definitely there. That is definitely the same. And I mean, the premise of this book is that a bookish nerd who's been reading about a place that he thinks is fictional for all his life ends up actually getting to go there on an adventure to find it in person. So like, sign me up, you know? This is one of those books that as a writer, you just read and think to yourself, how am I ever going to be able to write this well? How am I ever going to be this good? And sometimes that can be depressing, and other times it can be really uplifting and really motivational, and that is what this book is a lot of times for me. Both this and the sequel, Muse of Nightmares, are just, they're perfect. I don't know what else to say other than the fact that they have inspired so much of my writing and so much of the way that I perceive storytelling and stories. This one definitely deserves its spot on the list because it is like my adult Harry Potter in terms of just the amount of magic that I feel when I even so much as look at this book. It's unreal. We're getting near the end here. This one is a book that I read in my senior year of college, so like a year ago, and it is one that I actually read for a school assignment. We had to choose a book that we thought we could create a curriculum around for one of my education classes, and I ended up choosing this one, not anticipating how personal it was going to end up being to me and how much I was going to love it. And that book is, of course, Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. I don't really read a lot of contemporary, to be honest. I do really like it, but I don't actively seek it out the same way that I seek out fantasy and a lot of historical. So it is more so for me something with particular authors, where I know that I like specific authors and I will come back to them whenever they have a new book out, and John Green is one of those authors for me. And so I decided to use this book for the assignment so that I could also get a chance to read it for myself, and I was really not expecting how personal this book was going to be to me. I've liked all of his books in the past, but this one I kind of empathized with the most. It's just a very real human story, and it's one that I can kind of always come back to recenter myself and recalibrate if I'm ever kind of feeling out of sorts. I think there's certain books, especially in fantasy, that we go to escape, and even some books in contemporary that we go to escape, like these really cutesy, cheeky romances. But there's other books that I feel like we come to reflect. We come back to them to recognize ourselves, and this is one of those books for me. So I absolutely adore it. It has definitely changed me as a person, and I still feel very close kinship with this book today. And yeah, so that is the second to last book on this list. Finally, the last book on this list, and the most recent book that has impacted or changed my life in some way. You guys already know what I'm going to say. An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. The Greens pulling up the rear in this list, but both very deserving. I love this book. I could shout from the rooftops how much I love this book for the rest of my life. But what I was just saying about escape versus reflection, this is such a perfect medium of the two, where it simultaneously feels like you are going into this new world, and also it feels so human and real that it's scary and startling. The story is perfect, the writing is perfect, the characters are perfect, and everything about it is just perfect. I genuinely cannot name a book in recent history that has actively changed my outlook and made me more aware of something in the way that this book has. So if that's not enough of a recommendation, I don't know what is. And those are the books that shaped my life. Obviously, there are other books that I have read in my life that I have loved or that have changed me in some kind of way, but when I was going back through all of the books that I remember reading as a kid and all of the books that were sitting on my bookshelf for me to pick out for this video, I was really drawn to these particular ones that I have just shared with you. And I feel like they are a pretty good representation of the big books, or at least the big types of books that were impacting me at different points in my life, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching me lay it out for you. If you did, then give this video a like, and if you like my content, do subscribe. I make videos every Friday. If any of you guys are on the BookTurNet and want to make a similar video, please do and let me know. I would love to watch those, and I thank you very much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.